I was born in Long Beach, California in November 17, 1922, and I lived in the same house for a number of years before we moved away, so most of my time was in North Long Beach, growing up with friends, going to school, and
what did in that Long Beach area in that era? What did kids do for fun in the summer?
Well, summertime was going to the beach if you could make it. We had a bus route coming by near our house, and there was a nickel a ride, and we would have a nickel to come home with, but we would have to bum a ride to get down there. And so two of us would thumb a ride to get down to the beach, and then come home about 4 o'clock. Then we had a nickel to get the bus, so we make sure we'd get home. And we did that quite often during the summer months. Early on, that was. But as I got a little older, a fellow I went to school with, his dad was in the Naval Reserve on the Long Beach airport. So we would bum a ride to the Long Beach airport or walk. We could do that. It wasn't that far from our house. And then we would come home with him around 3 o'clock. This would be on Saturday. And so we spent a lot of time down at the airport. At least twice a month we did that. And we got acquainted with airplanes and got acquainted with the mechanics and everybody down there. And if they had to taxi an airplane someplace to move it, they would take one of us, or if there's a room for two, they'd put two of us in there, and we'd go with them as they taxied from one place to the next. And
that must have been a thrill.
That was something. I'll tell you, I'd never forget that. That was a great time. And he went into the Navy during the war.
But in that time, trying to get a sense of the kind of kid you were you the kind of kid that liked school?
Well, I liked school all right, and I wasn't fond of reading that much, but to learn to read and to learn about airplanes, I spent, there was a library not far from us, and I spent many an afternoon down there, and especially on Saturday, and I read all of the aviation books or magazines that they had. They had 2 or 3 magazines there, and I would read the stories in there about airplanes and male pilots and whatever was there in the magazines. And that's where I really learned to read, rather than reading school books.
I'm trying to picture your bedroom as a kid, whether it had like little pictures of airplanes in it and things like that.
Oh, yes. And pictures of airplanes. Whenever we had free time at art time, always an airplane, different kinds. And I always did that. I never drew anything else but airplanes. And the teachers, as soon as she said, okay, free art time, Bill, my nickname was Bill, and that's what I went by when I was a youngster. And she'd say, Bill, you can draw another picture if you want of airplanes. she knew I was going to do that.
Oh. Well, talk about your home life. Did you have brothers and sisters? And
yes, I had 3 brothers. My youngest brother was born when we were living in North Long Beach. My first 2 brothers, the oldest ones, were born in Idaho before my folks moved out to California. And I was the first child born in California.
What kind of work did your dad do?
My dad was a carpenter. He would in Idaho, he built bridges, and they used a lot of wood in bridges in those times. Besides some steel, they had wood in them too, and then they built bridges all of wood in some places on the smaller roads, and he was doing that for many a year. And I don't know what year it was, he decided to come to California to see if things were better, and so he hitched a ride on the flat cars, and he didn't pay for a rail car, and he bummed a ride on the trains to get to California, and they had a train that would come to Long Beach once a day, I think, and so he managed to get on that when he came to Long Beach and
got established there.
Yes.
Did the Depression affect your family?
Pardon?
Did the Depression affect your family?
Oh yes, later on, it didn't. There was no depression until I was a little, or first part in school, and luckily, where my dad worked, he didn't lose a job, but they didn't. He lost some. They couldn't pay him as much as he was, but he didn't lose a job. So, and in order to make up for that, instead of driving to work every day, he took a bus just about every day. And so we got along that way pretty well.
There was always food on the table and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Was there always food on the table then?
Yes, there was always food on the table. There wasn't a lot, but we always had something. And I'll always remember the meatloaf. Lots of meatloaf. and I still like meatloaf today. Yeah.
When you think back on your mother, tell me something you admired about her.
Well, she was always there to help, and she made sure that we were doing the right thing, didn't stay out too late, and we'd go out and play kick the can at night and so on, and come 8:30, time to come in. And so as long as we were allowed to stay out after dark some of the time, we felt like we were getting a little extra, so we wouldn't complain about coming in.
Mm-hmm. Same question about your dad. When you think back on him, what did you admire about him?
He knew what he was doing. He was good at his job, and he would help people fix their houses. Because he was good at carpentry and he liked the job, and sometimes he'd do it free, sometimes he would go and he wouldn't charge them anything particular, and whatever they could pay he would accept, because it was Depression time later on, and he did that quite often. And so,
the times of your older childhood, there was the Depression and that kind of thing. But when you look back on your childhood, did you like your childhood?
Yeah, pretty good. Because I got to go to the airport so often, I liked the airplane so much, I couldn't complain about that. And we had a good life. I compare today with then when I was growing up. And I go to a restaurant today and I see lots of little kids running around and all ages and so on. And I never went to a restaurant and had food away from the house until I was in high school, and I paid for it myself. I'd never been into a restaurant. I had no idea what it was like.
Well, tell us what your situation was when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
Well, I graduated from high school in 1940, and there I went to that Wilson High School because it had an aviation class, and I had to take a bus all the way across town. And my dad went with me to the Board of Education to get me in that high school because they had an aviation class, and it was good for 3 years. And the first 2 years, you had seventh period, it was always seventh period. You just took aviation history, read books, and talked about it. And then senior year, it was 3 hours every morning. And we went in and we worked on airplanes, did certain things that a high school student would learn how to do, and so on. And two of us recovered an airplane. The airplanes were somebody down that the teacher knew, and so it wouldn't cost him because we were doing the work. And then the teacher, if we made a mistake, would say, "Take this off and do it again," and that kind of thing. And we finished one airplane that year. And
now these are real full-size airplanes.
These full-size airplanes, yeah. The guy flew them, and so I had a good time doing that at the high school, and I also liked music, so I got into that. Played saxophone in high school, and so I had a good time. I had to take a bus ride all the way. I went by one high school every day that I should have been in, but because my dad took me down to the Board of Education, told him I liked airplanes, wanted to get in that class in special, so they made a special dispensation that I could, as long as I got down there.
You know, up till this point, you know, you had been in an airplane as a kid taxiing. You had worked on airplanes. Had you gotten in the air yet?
Yes, for my 15th birthday or 16th, I forgot about the 15th birthday, the folks surprised me and took me to the airport, and I had a ride in an airplane. And I flew in, I remember the airplane name, a Fleet airplane, which was a biplane, and it was quite popular. There are quite a few of them around. There aren't that many around now, but there's one or two that fly today.
Was it an open cockpit?
Open cockpit, yeah, two-place. And I was in seventh heaven. I just loved it.
I was going to say, did you remember the sensation of being up there?
Oh, yes, I did. I was looking down and seeing things so small and cars running around. I enjoyed it. I might say this about airplanes and what I did. Dad, being a carpenter, had a wooden ladder. They didn't have too many kind that opened up and a step ladder like that. Yeah. This was just one to lay against the side of the house or whatever and then climb up it. And he built the ladder. It's just wood, and it was so wide, and had a big box out in the backyard, wooden box, and I laid the ladder down in that box, and then I sat in one of the sections where you're walking up. It's a square, of course, but that was my cockpit. And the ladder was out there, the wings, and I had a map of Texas. Now, how I got that map of Texas, the street map, and of course it had other towns around, and so I practiced flying over Texas, going to town in that airplane.
What was your situation when that attack happened?
As I said, I graduated from high school in 1940, and I eventually, Douglas built a plant there, was building a plant there, and they were training people to eventually work there when they got it done. And downtown on 7th Street, I lived on 28 blocks down from that, and you go there after dark, after hours, after school or whatever you're doing, and they taught you to read blueprints and to do riveting and things like that, basic stuff that a guy would need to know a little bit of if he went to work for the aircraft factory. Then he'd go in there, he wouldn't be blank, and then they could, whatever they liked best or fit best, that's where they would put them. And in the high school class that I had, I learned to read blueprints. Well, when I went down and signed up for this class to eventually be hired by Douglas, I was doing some riveting and I could look at a map or have a blueprint, and I could tell off immediately what it was like, and the other guys wouldn't know. There was about 7 or 8 of us in this class learning this stuff, and so after about a few days, it wasn't very long, the instructor called me off to the side. He says, "You know too much. You don't need to be here. I'll teach you something else. It'll be a better job, and you'll make more money, and you won't be riveting." And so he got me into production control, they called it. And so I learned to read their paperwork. And so when we ended that class and went to be hired in, I was hired in production control, and I got to do some good things that I didn't expect, and so being in that high school paid off, and I thought it was pretty good.
So were you working at Douglas then when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
Yes, I was. I was going to junior college when I took this class at night to go to work, and so I was working at night at Douglas. Went to school in the daytime, and so when that thing hit on Sunday, why, the lights went out. Had a heck of a time getting around town that night. I mean, there were no lights anywhere.
There was a fear that the West Coast was going to be attacked, wasn't it?
We didn't know what was going to happen, and couldn't look around and see anything because it was dark. And so I did a lot of walking a bit, and just walked around and saw a few people we knew. My best buddy I went to high school with, or junior high with, we went down in his car and went to a couple of people we knew, and we walked around from a couple of places to different houses to friends that night. So come Monday when I went to class, and we were listening to the radio when Roosevelt came out and was saying that we were attacked this dastardly and all that, and that occurred fairly before noon, as I remember, and we heard that, and then went to work at that night, and still lights were very few and around, and they were already hanging black curtains up over doors, and built a little shed, a little thing around, so you went through the curtain before you went in the door, so there were no light showing. And they started that Monday morning, I guess, doing that.
Do you remember what your reaction was at that time to the attack? I mean, did you even know where Pearl Harbor was?
Yeah, I knew it was in the Pacific there, because I was listening many times at night to, forget the orchestra, very popular orchestra, dance music that came from Hawaii, from Honolulu, Hawaii, and I knew it was out there somewhere, not how far or anything, but I remember hearing music from Hawaii, Honolulu, and what's the name of the big hotel there? about the only hotel they had on the beach, of course. Whatever, I forget right now what the name is. I've been there since and been to that hotel, but so I knew it was there somewhere. I didn't know how far out or anything.
And what was your reaction when you heard all this on the radio? And were you ready to join up, or what was the reaction?
Well, I wasn't ready to join up because I was in school, and I knew from my reading that if you got 2 years of college in the service, I was almost your free. You could choose what you wanted to do almost, and so I wanted to stay there and finish up 2 years, but I wasn't allowed to do that.
Why was that?
Well, I was drafted in November of '42. I got my first draft notice, and so my dad went down to the draft board with me. He knew one person on the draft board, and we'd like to finish the 2 years. And so they said, well, we'll let him go till January, at least, and come back then. So I got a second notice to come in January. So we went down again, and they said no. Dirty bastards. And I was ticked off highly. They didn't need me. They could have waited till June, and I'd have 2 years in, because if you had 2 years of college, and some guys got direct commissions without going to OCS.
Yeah.
And you almost picked your job, whatever you had the most interest in, whatever you'd been doing in the civilian life, and they wouldn't let me stay in. So, well, I signed up. I wanted to be a cadet. I wanted to learn to fly and fly in the Air Force, but they forced me in, and so I was drafted. I went in the 9th of February. I was on a train headed for Florida.
Well, once you, hang on a sec, I'm just going to get a little closer there. One thing that's really nice about you, you don't move around. A lot of guys, when they talk, they're going like this, and everything, their head's going like this. You stay nice and still, so it's really nice, so I can zero in on you. Well, take us through then the training period that you went through. I mean, you're on the train. Take us from there.
Well, I went to Fort MacArthur for induction, and there again, I had learned something before most people did, and it helped me when I was in those 3 days before I headed for Florida. I heard about the Civil Air Patrol right after the war started. One of the guys that I worked with, Douglas, had joined the Civil Air Patrol, and he says, and the reason I joined, telling me this, it guaranteed me a place in the Air Force, Air Corps, rather than being drafted for something else. I would be drafted for Air Corps, and I could choose schools or whatever and go in. So I said, I'll show you where to go, and you go with me and sign up, Civil Air Patrol. There was a place just up the road in not far from Long Beach. And so I joined up there, and on weekends went to learn how to march and half military stuff. And I'd worked on it because I'd worked on airplanes before. They were glad to see me there, so that I knew how to handle an airplane. You're not poking your hands in it and lousing up the fabric and so on, like a lot of people might do. And then when I was drafted, the first thing to do is you line up this month. You're okay. Gave us a number. I don't know what it was, and we lined up in the morning to go to take this test or go get your shot or whatever we were doing right there at draft time in Fort MacArthur. And because I was half military, I wasn't looking around. And, I was watching the guy that's giving you the orders. And at the end of the first day, he said, "Come here." He said, "I don't know where you learned it, but you're 10 times much better than these guys. So when I call you out next time, you don't have to come." So I didn't have to go to the march and from here to there. He said, "You can just go over there and I'll meet you there." And then at the end of the 2 days, everybody was supposed to go home for a couple of days before you got on the train. And as they told us, we'd be on a train at a certain time on whatever day it was. And he said, "You can go home and stay a couple of days. Just be here on whatever day it was, because you're going to catch the train before noon." And the other guys had to stay there and march and learn how to stand in line and not look around and all that kind of stuff. So I felt, I paid attention to what I was doing and when I was in the Civil Air Patrol, and so all of that paid off. And so I felt good for myself. and then we got on the train. We were going to go to Florida for basic training. Gee whiz, basic training in the Air Force in Florida. That's a long way. I'd never been on train, hadn't been out of the state.
And you're going to be 3,000 miles away from home.
Away from home. I was good, gee. And so we got on the train, and it was a troop train, but our car was last. There was 6 or 7 of us in this car. It was a Pullman, pull-down beds. The rest of the guys, they were sitting up all the time.
And how long of that train trip would that take?
7 days.
And you've got beds.
And we had a bed every night. And a Pullman guy to pull it down and push it up and made the bed for us. I mean, it was Class A as far as we were concerned. And the meals were GI type. They only spend so much money for a meal, so you didn't get the best cuts of meat and so on. But in the car, they said, if you want to add a little money to it, we'll give you, you can eat what anybody would eat on the train that were going a civilian ride. So if you had a little extra money, a couple of bucks is all you need, or $1 or whatever, and they'd give you a little bit of food. So a couple of times I did that. I didn't have a lot of money, so I didn't want to spend it all, because we were told we're going to have, when we got to New Orleans, there would be a long stop there as they took some more of the people and done some cars and hooked some more on. We'd be there long enough to have time to go to town. So I didn't want to spend any money and go to town with nothing.
You know, at that age, what kind of guy were you? I mean, you know what I mean? You had the full spectrum of personalities on that train. There was the loud guy, there was the shy, quiet guy, there was the intellectual professor type, there was the joker, all the personalities. I mean, which guy were you?
Middle.
You weren't real quiet, but
no, I wasn't quiet, but I wasn't boisterous or anything.
Yeah. And observant, it sounds like.
Yeah, I've always been that way.
Well, yeah. What was your impression of Florida?
Well, I read about and heard about Florida being a place for people in the East would head for the winter. And all the time I was down there, it was winter, because it was January or February, first week of February, when we were on the train. So the second week of the last 2 weeks of February, it was in Florida, and here it was winter, and here I am basking in going swimming, and I'd never gone swimming in February before, not in California, and I marveled that I was able to do that. And I wrote to my parents and said, "Hey, I get to go swimming." And we're down on the beach doing our practice for infantry. Whatever you're doing for basic training, you have to learn how to march, carry a rifle, and that kind of stuff.
You know, at that time, at that age, before the service, had you ever fired a gun before?
Yeah, 22s. I had never fired a shotgun or anything. I hadn't done that.
Take us through then the training that you went through, because basically they're taking this young kid from California and ultimately they're going to turn him into a gunner. I mean, take us through.
They didn't know that at the time.
No, but somewhere in there in all that training, that was the end result, I guess.
Yeah, you have to learn how to march. You had to learn how to handle a rifle. You had to learn how to shoot one. And we'd go to the range and shoot at targets, not a lot, but enough to where you could carry a rifle if you had to. And if you had to shoot it, you could. You don't do too much in basic training when you're there, a great deal. Most of it's learning how to walk, man, mostly. Because people, it's hard for some people to put their left foot out first. And that took some guys a long time.
Not everybody was a good dancer.
That's right. I dance all the time.
Well, you got through. I'm assuming you got through the basic training. Where did it go from there then?
Well, in basic training, as you're signing up and doing what do you want to do, what kind of classes you want to go to, and so on, I wanted to become a cadet and wanted to fly. So they accepted that, and in that basic training, I forgot to say, in basic training in Florida, we lived in hotels. It's another thing was a big surprise. They were small hotels for many people from the north to go up and spend the winter, and they weren't very big, they weren't scrumptious, but it wasn't a tent. We weren't living in the sand and all that kind of stuff. So I lucked out there. So my first part of the military was different than most anybody that was drafted and went in, or even joined up and went in. So that was good for that. We marched in the street on the bricks and whatever. But living in the hotel, come time for people to join up to want to do things, you had to take tests, especially to become a cadet. And if you want to do something like go medics or something like that, you had to take a test to do some things like that. So there were about 150 or so guys went to the big room in the hotel. They came from all over the place, from all the other hotels, and came in there. So there were 150 in the whole hotel there where I was. There weren't that many rooms, and 4 to a room. And so we sat in there to take the test, and they said the top 15 will be accepted for cadet training. And we'll post the names in a couple of days after we've gone through all the tests. And so I sat in there and took the test. I felt pretty good. I thought I knew lots of stuff that had current events and things like that. And I've always been interested in current events, reading the papers. I read the editorial pages mostly. And so they posted the names in a couple of 3 days, and I was number 13 out of the 15. So I felt good about that, and so I knew I would be taking more physicals and stuff before I would go to that. But I had signed up for radio school to go to after basic training. Other guys would go to mechanic school or whatever. They had weather, they had gunnery or ammunition or ammo stuff. There's 3 or 4 different schools I think you could choose to go to in after basic training in the Air Corps, and I chose radio. And so after basic training, I went to Scottsfield, Illinois for radio school, and one or two of us went up there, and we were on the train by ourselves. And when I left basic training, I left on payday, so I was redlined. I didn't get paid, so I had no money on the train, or very little, and I was ticked off at that. I assumed the guys that were with me didn't get paid either, and they said, "Well, you'll get double pay come your first month at Scottsfield. You know, they'll make it up." And okay, and I told my folks. They sent me $5 or $10 to last out, so I could buy a few things at the PX. And so when it came up time to go get my money for at Scottsfield, I didn't get paid from that month that I missed. Dumb. And it turned out, I complained, and they said, "Well, we'll check on it." And I got a note back, and they called me in the office. We wrote, and they said, "You signed that you got your money, and we have no way to give you any more than this month's pay." So I never got, I said, "No, I didn't get paid. I did not get paid." And they said, "Well, we'll check again." Somebody in the finance department signed my name and took my money. When, after radio school, the next thing you do, and if you're in other basic, they call them tech schools, whatever you're in, if you'd signed up to become a gunner, I forgot to tell you this. When I was in radio school, I had the first part of my physical for cadets, and it was an eye test, and it was the kind where you line up 2 posts, depth perception. And so they called my name, said he'd be at the office for this and take that test after class. And so I went in, and there was a second Louis and a corporal. And so all I have to do is scoot down and look down this box, long box with string and 2 posts, line them up. Okay, that's supposed to be together. And so I took that test, and I was familiar with that, and so I was ready. And as I lined them up, and I said, "That's it." And they said, "Okay." So they said, "You didn't pass, so you're out of cadets." Well, because I knew about the test, I quickly put my eyes down on the strings. And when he pushed them back, I could see one string move and the other one didn't. So I was off some. But the one string moved about 1 inch that I could tell with that quickness. It wasn't that. if that was only off an inch for that distance, how I flunked it, I don't know. They just need they didn't need any more cadets. They had too many guys flying, too many students already.
It was a way of washing people out.
Yeah, and so I was ticked off that they did that for that much. And so they said, well, you can, if you still want to fly, we can sign you up for gunnery school if you want to go. And I said, sure. So I didn't even sign anything. I just told them I wanted to go to gunnery school. So as soon as come time for gunnery school and the end of radio school, I was off to gunnery school and went to Florida again. I was in Florida again for the winter. I was there for October and November and graduated from gunnery school in December. So I had my first 2 winters in Florida. I mean, how many people can come up with that? Not many. Yeah. And so I felt good about that. And gunnery school was the most damn fun. I enjoyed that more than anything in the service.
Why was that?
Well, I'd never shot a shotgun, and I never shot at targets other than paper targets with a .22 or shooting at cans out in the desert. And in those days, you didn't have to go very far to find desert to shoot, and because there weren't that many people living in California. But I enjoyed that. But gunnery school, you're shooting at these clay pigeons, as they call them. Pigeon is a round disc, but they call them, clay pigeons. And I'd never fired a 12-gauge shotgun before, and I'd heard those things would knock you in your fanny if you're not careful. And the guy that was showing us the first day out there, he said, if you've never fired a gun before, make sure you hold it tight against your shoulder, and it won't bother you. Well, you had to do that, so I did that, and it didn't bother me. A couple, 3 guys said, "Oh God, that hurt me." Well, he didn't hold it tight enough. So,
at that age, at that time, how tall are you, and how much do you weigh?
I weighed probably 135, and I was 5'11". Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so you're kind of a tall, lean guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're learning how to lead a target with.
Yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed that, and I was classed as the best guy in the group shooting at it, because I seldom missed a clay pigeon, and I quickly learned the first day that first time you shoot, it's just 1 pigeon going out. And next day or 2, they come out at the same time. So you have to learn how to move things fast and still hit. And I noticed as they passed, if they came out at the right height, they would cross, and I could hit 2 at one time. And I did that. And the guy, that was an accident. It just never happened before. And I said, I picked that. And he said, oh, you didn't either. I said, well, if it does that again, I'll get 2, and I'll tell you when I'm going to get 2. And after 2 or 3 more shots, 2 came out just at the right angle, and they crossed there. I said, I got 1, bang, and I got 2. And he didn't believe it yet. He said, so he went down, and we were doing some more shooting there, and he went down and got the officer of the day. He said, I want to show you something. And he said, you call it again next time you can. And it wasn't long before they came out again, and I got 2 and 1. And that officer said, it's never been done in this place ever.
Well, so you got some accolades, and
it was great.
Well, take us through the rest of it as far as because at some point you're firing off 50 caliber machine gun.
Yes. The next thing you do after pellets or shotgun, you shot a machine gun with pellets, air driven, and you shot a bunch of targets with these things. That was fun to do. There were larger pellets than your BB gun that you had at home. And we did that for a week, and then we went to 30 caliber and learned how to take a 30 caliber apart and put it back together a little bit. And we fired that at targets, and some of those were moving targets. They had a Jeep out there, 2 big posts on it, and a big cloth in between, a streamer that was tied at both ends. And then you got to do some tracking with that, with painted bullets, so your bullets would leave your color on it if you hit it. And then from that, 30 caliber, then we went to 50 caliber. And so the last 3 weeks was 50 caliber all the time, doing different things. And then learning the 50 caliber. We had to take it apart and put it back together. And in order to graduate from the class, you had to take it apart and put it back together blindfolded, and they give you 15 minutes to do it. Everybody was worried about that. But and then we got in, besides handheld 50s, we got into turret held, and then you swung that around. It was an upper turret, and you shot that. Nobody got in a ball turret. And then the last week was flying, shooting at targets. And you flew an AT-6 with a 30 caliber, shooting out at targets and shooting into the water, showing you, no matter how stiff you hold it, those bullets are going all over the place. They're not going exactly where you think it's going. And so that was fun. I enjoyed gunnery school, but I was good at it. After gunnery school, you go to a collecting place where you become a crew. You meet a pilot, and he starts. By then, he's picked his officers to go with him, navigator, bombardier, and co-pilot. By the time he's picking the crew, radioman, engineer, and the rest of the gunners. And so you meet all over the place. And I went to Tampa, Florida again. I was in Florida after gunnery school, and it's still winter. And it was December. And so I went to Tampa to join a crew. And when I got there, I had turned in my travel orders with all the other guys' names on it that were supposed to show up at the same time. And I got there, and they said, "We don't have you. You're not supposed to be here." Well, this order says I'm supposed to be here. What am I going to do? He said, "Well, it'll probably show up. So we'll put you in the cook shack because there's room in there. And you can stay there for a couple of days, and I'll call you as soon as the paper comes in so we find out what to do." And for 4 days, I wasn't called. So something's wrong here, and so I went back to him. He says, "I forgot." He didn't even look for anything. He forgot to take care of me. He says, "I'll take care of you. Come back tomorrow. We'll have a place for you." And so I went in the next day, and I said, "Well, there's a bed for you, and you can join a crew. They'll pick you." But he says, "You have a choice," which many people wouldn't get. He says, "A crew that's been here for 1 month, a tail gunner is asked to leave." He was a Jewish fellow, and he says, "I'm afraid we're going to fly over Europe, and I don't want to fly over Germany. And he wasn't, goofing off and trying to get out. He glad to not go to Germany. So the pilot has to let him off because you're not drafted to fly, and you can stop anytime you want. So he told me, he says, well, and if you go and talk to the pilot, they've already been here a month, and the first month of phase training is a lot of meetings and things that you fly very little. And so if you want to go and get into that crew, you can avoid the first month if you want to. I said, well, I'll try it. I'll see. And so I went over and talked to the pilot for about 3 minutes or so, and he said, sure, glad to have you. And so I told him how my gunnery went, and it was good at that. And he was worried more about my gunnery than anything else. And so he accepted me, and I went back and told him that I would be on that crew. And so for 2 months, we flew around Florida and Cuba and all that kind of stuff. We did our phase training. I did I was a tail gunner. Well, 2 weeks before we were finishing up our phase training, and we were going to go somewhere and pick up an airplane and fly it somewhere. We just assumed to be in Europe. And the ball turret gunner came to me and says, I don't like it in here, and I'm going to ask the pilot to let me go. I'll join another crew, but I don't want the ball turret. I will not fly in it. Well, he'd been doing it for whatever time, 2.5 months, and I'd never been in a ball turret. Our gunnery school never used a ball turret to teach anybody. Now, I assumed other places did. I was in the upper turret, and so I'd never been in a ball turret. Here we have a few more days of training before we were going to go get an airplane. Well, I didn't want a new guy coming in and not knowing him from Adam. And he couldn't ask, he said, I won't ask the two waist gunners because they were both washed out cadets and they were both 6'2". They would fit in there, but he didn't know that particularly. And so he wasn't going to ask them. He said, if you don't take it, I'm going to be gone. Well, I didn't want a new guy. And I know the rest of the crew would be pissed off at me if I didn't take it. They didn't want a new guy either.
So he was asking for you to switch position?
So I said, yes, I would do it. It took me about 2 minutes to come up and say yes. And so he said, we'll be flying in a couple of days, and we'll go out there and I'll show you how to operate it. And because I'd been in the upper turret, they're similar. So I got in it the first time, and we were headed for Cuba, and it was a night flight. And while we were out over the Atlantic, he said, well, you might as well get in. And we were about 6,000 feet or so. And so he cranked the guns down and pulled the door open. And you just step in that, put your foot on that seat, and then sit down. Then you have earphones on anyway, because you're inside the airplane. And he showed me where the switches were, and the two handles that you wiggle to get the turret locked in gear. And he did that. He showed me how to do it. And I didn't do it. He did it. And come time, he closed the door, the hatch. He said, then over the earphones, he said, okay, now turn the switch on there, and it'll be you can use it. So I turned the switch on, and I was just sitting there, and I'm getting ready to swing it the first time, and all of a sudden, the turret came loose from its gear, elevation gear, and the guns came straight up, and with no ammunition in it, you overbalanced the turret. That's why it came loose. And I was at night, and that thing came down and stopped abruptly at the bottom when the guns were straight up. My heart was out there in the middle of the ocean. That was my first time in a ball turret. I was scared me to death. And it took me a while to turn the turret. I was really flummoxed, really. But I started moving around and got used to going in the directions and everything. And for the rest of the trip, I moved around. Then when we came in to land, he said, this is the way you get out of it. You put the gun straight down. So I put them straight down. They opened the door, the trap,
the hatch.
The hatch. And the waist gunners helped to do that, to make sure. And then they helped me out and turn off the switch so it won't move while you're getting out. And that's what you do every trip. We finished that night and learned how to get out of it. And we had, I think, 3 more flights to do before we left there to go pick up an airplane and get assigned an airplane. That takes about 2 or 3 days to do that before you fly out and head for your combat zone. And so we went to Georgia and to get an airplane, assign it to be into an airplane, and we had 2 flights in it. And the main thing, and the pilots told us this, we heard it anyway, that the main thing that you're testing flying is get the fuel consumption, because you're going to be flying a long way, and if it doesn't give you a good mileage, we want to know that, and we'll give you another airplane to try, because they don't want a thing running out of fuel in the middle of the Atlantic. So we tested this airplane out, and they said, this is the only time you'll have this said to you as a crew. You can test it any way you want. You can go anywhere you want. You can fly as low as you want. It's your airplane, and you're free to, and there's no FAA checking on you. We're not going to check on you. Just bring the airplane back in good shape. And so we got to fly low and went all over the place. We went up high and tested it all out. And one day the second day we were real low, and there was a train going along there. So we go down there and fly right along the edge of the train, waved at the engineer, and they waved back. That was fun. So we had an airplane to fly. We assumed to England. And there's 2 ways to go, north route or the southern route, which is down the Azores and across Africa and then north to England. So we were ready to go, get that airplane and take off before noon. I forgot the time anyway. But that night, knock on the door, sudden change. You're not going to fly. You're going to get up and get on a train early, and you're going to go to New York. And you're going to take a boat. They grounded all the airplanes on the field, So there was a bunch of crews, 40 or 30 or 40, I don't know how many, had quite a few, around 40. You guys are going to get on this train and go north. Because your beds will be full of somebody else tonight. So you had to leave. And we went to New York, and they'd made a major change in the landing gear, and they had to do all that for the next bunch that came in. And they would test the planes and fly them. So we went to New York the next morning, went to New Jersey, across from New York, and so we made it up to New Jersey, and we spent 2 days there getting ready to go to New York and get on a ship. They didn't say which one, and we knew there were convoys going all the time, and most of us knew what a convoy was like. You're 3 weeks on the water, and so on. And so we went to New York. We left the field, or the New Jersey barracks, got on the train and went north. And I volunteered to take a Jeep and be a traffic guard. So I did that for fun. And I was issued a 45 to wear, so look official, guiding, stopping traffic and all that as we went up. So we got to New Jersey. We were there 2 days, and then they gave us a bunch of stuff. There were a lot of ground troops there. And they gave us OD blanket, OD towels, OD handkerchiefs, just like we were going to be on the ground somewhere. And so they don't want those guys hanging out white towels when they wash them, when they're on the ground in the battles and all that, and white handkerchiefs, because they took all those away from everybody. So we went to England with OD stuff. Only ones there with OD towels. But anyway, we went down, and we were walking with our big barracks bag and our B-4 bag, which was a special bag the Air Force got for clothing. They made them for civilian clothes, civilians after the war, and it was a big, nice bag. And so we were walking with that and a steel helmet and all that stuff, walking along to go on the dock to get on a ship. So we didn't know what kind it was going to be. Pretty soon we stopped in front of this pretty good-sized ship, we thought, and it turned out to be the Queen Elizabeth. And so we went up on that. So we lucked out again. I lucked out again. And in 6.5 days, we were in Scotland. And the trip on the ship so there were about 14,000 people on board. So it wasn't luxurious. The food was not the best. I would go down and eat, line up to eat, but if I saw I looked at what was coming, and I might walk out and not eat, because I didn't like what they fixed all the time. Breakfast always good, so I always had these breakfasts. 2 meals a day on the ship. Too many guys eating, so they could only eat twice a day.
What were the quarters like on the ship where you were staying?
We were enlisted. We're all in the lower decks, and we were three beds high, and steel beds, and mattress was stuffed hay or whatever, and it wasn't the best.
You avoid the seasickness problem and all that?
And there were a lot of seasickness. I didn't get that right, but because there was seasickness around, my waist gunner and I that I got acquainted with most in the 2 months I was there with working at Tampa, he and I liked about the same thing, so we went together doing likable things. So we went up on deck as much as possible to get out of the mess in the bottom. And so we spent a lot of time up there. And fresh air.
Was the ship zigzagging?
We would stand up there and look back the tail and see that S mark because we went unescorted across, because we were going 36 knots instead of miles per hour, and so it was around. It was a little bit more than that, miles per hour. 36, probably close to 39 miles an hour. So we missed all the subs that way, I guess, because then they always, I'm sure they tried to get them, and they never did. So the Queen Elizabeth, they were still going after the war. And so after 6 days, one night, it was stormy. That ship didn't sleep. We were leaning so much, you roll out of bed. And so I tucked your sheets in tight so that you wouldn't roll out. And it was a rough night. And the next morning, during breakfast, there was a note from the captain. Ding, 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 a special. Now here it is. It's the captain speaking, and it says, "Our ship has broken another record. Had never had this before. We leaned 47 degrees. A couple of more and you wouldn't come up." So that was the major thing of going across. We arrived in Scotland, and the ship is too big to go to a dock, and so we took a smaller boat to get off the ship and get out on the dock. And then we got on trains immediately and headed south to go into England from Scotland. And Stoke-on-Trent is where we went. Everybody went there for 2 days, and there you had shots if you were lacking a certain shot or whatever. And also they showed us film about England, living in England, some of the things that they did that's different and so on. And trucks aren't trucks, they're lollies and all that kind of stuff. They give us different names that we would be acquainted with by the time we left England, and their money. And we practiced money those 2 days we were there, because we were going to be paid in pounds. You had to learn that rather quickly, and it's 12s, not in 10s. That was lousy. It took a long while to get accustomed to that, pounds and shillings and all that. That wasn't easy. And so we did that for a couple of days, and we had a couple of nights out to go to a movie or something, and we went together. It wouldn't let us out except as a group. Didn't want us getting lost. And we had to wear a white handkerchief on our elbow or arm so that we could be seen easier in the dim light. And so the trip south to our base, after the 2 days there, we were in we were fairly a little ways northern England, so it took a little while to get down to where as we went south, crews would get off at different towns or different bases were. And as we'd stop, we'd look at the name of the town on the track dock there, and this isn't yours, and our hours, and the officers knew where we were going. And pretty soon we got to Bury St. Edmunds. Said, okay, we're off here. 11 crews get off here. And so that was our first day of learning about Bury St. Edmunds and where we were going to be for our time. And we still thought it was 25 missions. And so we get off.
That is 25 missions. You could then go home.
Yeah, that was your tour. And you could sign up for another partial tour if you wanted to or anything, but 25 we thought it was. So the next day, as we were walking around, we went to chow. First thing we heard, ha, it's 30. Oh, we were a little ticked off. 30, God, the other 5 missions. So we got acquainted with the base, and we had practice missions and things like that.
Let me ask you just a couple of questions that I didn't ask earlier. Who is your pilot?
Pardon?
Who is your pilot?
Oh, John Moser was our pilot. He was from, where he's from? Illinois or something like that.
And Moser, M-O-S?
M-O-S-E-R, Moser.
And who is the waist gunner you like to hang around with?
That was Ken. Shouldn't ask me. I'd have told you.
Yeah, I know. It'll pop out.
It'll pop out.
And when you arrived, how close to D-Day, June 44, was it?
We arrived on the base in the middle of April, because we left dock in New York the 30th of March, and we were one day on the ocean, and we arrived on the 6th of April to get off in Scotland.
In 1944.
In 1944. So D-Day was a little ways away, not much, all of May. And because my first 3 missions were in March. And so we had a...
when you got to the base, what was your impression of the place? What did it look like?
Well, it was a lot of boardwalks, not much blacktop to walk on. All the bomber bases had cement for runways and blacktop for taxiways, and not much blacktop around the base to walk on. So when it rained, it was pretty muddy in some of the places. And
what was the living quarters like where you...
Some living quarters were Quonset huts, and some were tar paper, and they were quite long. There were enough bunks in this long thing we were in. There was 2 or 3 of them there near us, and there were 6 crews of 6 men in each of these long things. So many of us were in there. And we had 1 heater, because with spring we didn't need much for heat there. And
were you issued a bicycle or anything like that?
No, you had to buy a bicycle. That's one of the first things we learned was you find out who's shipping out, who's finished. They're the ones that'll say, hey, we got a bike, we're leaving. So you went around and found a bike you liked and negotiated a price. That was it. That was your transportation on base the rest of the time you were there. And so we were all on bikes, and you could ride to town. We weren't that far from it, the main part, and go to a movie if you... Flight crews you could leave the base any time you weren't flying. We arrived on the base the 11th of April, and my first mission was the 26th of April. So 2 or 3, 4, maybe 6 practice missions. I forget the exact number. But one of the last ones was we were going to fly, and 2 guys came up to the door of the airplane and said, "Hey, we've been given permission to fly with you." They were from the anti-aircraft artillery, and they were down the road a ways, and they were going to end up being in D-Day in France. They didn't know that. We didn't know that, but they were stationed down there, and their gun was there, and I don't know how many, 10 or whatever this number they had around it, 10 or 12, I don't know. And so these 2 guys wanted to bum a ride and go for a ride during the practice run. Sure, come on in. So we were flying. I had the turret down and the door hatch open in case anything should go up if we were attacked while we were flying. And so I was standing watching out the waist, and this airplane off over here just in front of us on our right, we were the second element, he was the first element. And that airplane, a bunch of white smoke came out of it. Ooh, hey, there's smoke. And then immediately after that smoke quit, the airplane just the tail dropped and the nose went up, and he went straight up. It didn't go very far, and then it turned over on its right wing and made a couple of turns. Bang, it was down. Well, while it was doing that, I jumped in the turret, and I watched it go down and hit and explode. 3 chutes get out, and there were 11 guys on board, so the rest of them didn't make it. And so while I was in the turret still, those 2 guys saw that happen, and they were so disturbed about, I don't know what word to fit. They were so worried about that airplane, our airplane going down. We don't want them to. They were so nervous. They tried to put their chutes on. Of course, didn't know how to do it anyway. But because they were in a hurry, they got help from the waist gunners and got the chutes on. And they were, the rest of the trip, they were just, they didn't want to be in an airplane anymore. So when we landed, they got out. We let them out first, and they got their chutes off real quick, kissed the ground. No more of this flying for us. They were so shook up about that airplane going down. Never ever flying. I don't know if they've ever flown a civilian airplane again after the war or not. But they were really, they were white. They were disturbed. Really, I've never seen anybody that way.